Hey guys, um, I want to review some of the things that we discussed in the session, the little intro to Photoshop that we did. So I'm going to work with the same photos that we worked with in the classroom, and what I want to talk about is remind you a little bit about layers and how the layers work, not necessarily going through everything about the layers that we discussed, but more so on how to create the composites that we did really simply, and then just go over some of the options that we did discuss. So first thing I want to do is combine two photos together. So I already have a photo. We have this doll, and then we also worked with the fireworks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the fireworks. I want to remind you again that as far as the way that Photoshop works, when you open up multiple images, by default it opens up in tabs. So I have two tabs if I want to switch back and forth between the images. Also keep in mind that you can go up to the window menu, go down to arrange, and you can set it to float all in windows, and what that's going to do is it's going to separate the windows. So you can easily use your move tool up here and then drag and drop one photo on top of the other. I'm going to go back to the default. So I'll go back to Window, Arrange, and then choose Consolidate all the tabs. So that's going to put them back in a way that the order that they came before, where they were sitting next to each other. Not in the same order necessarily, but where they were both set up as tabs. To move one photo on top of another, you have to use the Move tool, okay? So keep that one in mind. I'm going to take the Move tool and I'm going to grab the image, and remember that you can select the image anywhere. You don't have to be right in the center. So you have to grab the image, drag it up to the tab of the photo you want to move it into, wait for the image to switch over, and then put your cursor back anywhere within this area. If you let it go on the tab itself, it's not going to work. So you have to put your cursor anywhere here in this gray area or on the image itself. Keep in mind that if you want to center the image, you want to hold down the shift key, and that's going to put your image right in the center. Now I have a horizontal photograph of the fireworks on top of a vertical photograph of the doll. So I need to rotate the horizontal image. For rotating the images, you can go up to the Edit menu. So you have Free Transform using the shortcut of Command T, or you can use the Transform option. Keep in mind that the Free Transform is actually a combination of Scale and Rotate, and then you can use shortcuts to access the other options. So I'm going to use Transform, but I want you guys to be aware that you can also use the Free Transform. I'm going to use Transform, and I'm going to go to the Scale option. Now the reason I'm going to the Scale option is, first of all, it puts a bounding box around the image to remind you that at this point you can resize your photograph. Right now I'm holding down both the Option key and the Shift key. All right, I'm working on a Mac. So on a PC it would be the Control key and the Alt key. I'm sorry, the Alt key and the Shift key. Now, the Shift key keeps the corners constrained, keeps your movements constrained, which means that, let me undo that with Command Z. You have one level of undo with Command Z or Control Z on the PC. By holding down the Shift key, keep this in mind as well. This is a really useful tip for you. When you hold down the Shift key, you want to grab from a corner and scale down from a corner. That's going to keep your aspect ratio. All right, if I don't hold down the Shift key, I'm going to undo that. If I don't hold down the Shift key, I can then transform this image any way that I like. All right, one thing that we didn't discuss in the class because it's a little beyond the time limit that we had is if you make your image bigger than the actual size that it came in at, what you're ending up doing is stretching out the pixels, which means that they're going to become softer. All right, so I'm going to go back and talk about, I can't go back to my original setting, but anyways, um, talk about the next shortcut. If I hold down the Option key or the Alt key on the PC and grab from a corner, what it does is it scales towards the center. Notice how it's moving towards the center versus when I did it the other way, it goes to the opposite corner. Okay? This is without holding down any keys. All right, it's moving to the opposite corner. If I hold down the Option or the Alt key, I'm scaling towards the center. Now, if I add the Shift key to that, I'm going to constrain the aspect ratio and scale the entire thing to the center. We want to hit the corners versus top, bottom, left, or right, simply because that is going to distort the image. All right, it's okay if we have an image like this, we can distort it. You know, you'll see things like this in tutorials where people are distorting the images, but that's something that we really want to avoid for the most part. Okay, so I'm going to escape out of that. I hit the escape key to cancel out. So keep that in mind as well. The escape key is your cancel button. And I'm going to go back into it. I'm going to use the shortcut of Command T. Keep in mind once again, that shortcut is right here, free transform. So you'll see the check mark next to free transform right now. So currently I have access to scaling in free transform as well as rotating. So if I put my cursor on the outside here, I can now rotate the image. All right, with rotating, I can hold down the Shift key and rotate to drop this right into place. All right, but I also want to point out that you can also go back up to the Edit menu, go down to Transform, and you can switch to any of the other options that you have here. So for example, if I want to rotate 90 degrees clockwise, simply click on that option and it's going to rotate the image. All right, but I also want to point out to you, as I did in the class, that those options are going to be available right here in front of you with a right click. But if you right click on the photo, those options are going to be in a contextual menu right in front of you here. So it's the same options. Okay, so you can select one of them, for example, rotate 90 degrees clockwise. Boom, all done. Now you'll still notice that there's a bounding box around the outside. So all you have to do is either double click inside of the box to apply it, or hit your return key on the keyboard or enter key on the keyboard. All right, so I'll hit the return key on the keyboard. It has now been applied. You'll notice that the bounding box is now gone. In our layers panel, we'll see that we have two layers now. We have layer 1, which are the fireworks, and then we have the background layer, which is the doll. I can turn off the eyeball for layer 1 to see the layer below it. Layer 1 is also currently active, meaning that it's highlighted in blue. I want to create a really quick composite. So one of the options that we discussed was using opacity. So I can grab the opacity slider and I can lower it. Keep in mind again that all you have to do is put your cursor onto word opacity and you can scrub left or right to change the opacity. Also keep in mind that opacity and fill are pretty much doing the same thing. So you don't have to use a combination of the two. All right, so there's the opacity. But like as I mentioned to you guys in class, when it comes to opacity, you're really losing detail. All right, so you can see how you can see the fireworks here, but we're losing detail. It's flattening out a bit. So a better way to create composites when it comes to this are using the blend modes. Right here where it says normal, if you click on this box, this drop down, you now have a number of options to use when it comes to blending images together. So I have the multiply options up at the top, or the darken options, excuse me. We have the lighten options, and then we also have our overlay options. So we can use whatever we want, and at this point we can also combine this with an opacity change or opacity adjustment. All right, it's really up to you on how you want to work with it, but I just want to point out or remind you of how you can use these together. All right, and that'll be our first video for the things that we discussed in class. Okay, so hopefully this is going to help you guys out some.